Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. In manufacturing, it's all go, go, go. You know, the focus is on production, meeting deadlines, solving problems as fast as possible. And often we just don't take a step back to understand how we're showing up. And if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard about this. Yes, about our mindset and our behaviors, just that communication. And, when teams aren't aligned, instead of driving straight into the problem together, they spend energy protecting themselves, like, hey, is this going to be my fault, my team's fault? Should I be protecting my team? And then we're not focusing on what the problem is. And that all starts from the top and how you work with teams. My friend, Darcy Luoma, she's our guest today. She's a powerhouse in the world of coaching and consulting. And she's a dear friend. And she's a creator of this thoughtfully fit model. We're going to talk about this today. And she's transformed countless teams and leaders, across industries. And, I'm going to get some help from you today, Darcy. Welcome to the show.
I'm so excited. Thanks for having me, Trevor.
It's just recently I've seen this more, Darcy, that in manufacturing, it's like a chocolate fountain. Like I love chocolate. But, whether you take that chocolate from the top of the fountain or the bottom of the fountain, it doesn't get better towards the bottom, right? It kind of tastes about the same. It's good chocolate. So whatever chocolate's coming out at the top, it's as good as it's going to get. So I find that, really working with that management team and executive team in manufacturing, that really dictates how the whole team does. You work with a lot of teams. Is that in all industries like that?
Oh, what a great metaphor. I will say I've never heard that. I love it. I mean, you can't go wrong with a good opening with the chocolate metaphor. And yes, I mean, the culture is set from the top. And whether it's intentional and the executive team is really consciously setting the culture or not, there's always a culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And in these plants, sometimes like a football team, they bring in a new coach, for a turnaround. And it's hard, right? Just depending on how everyone's working together. And we want to go right to kind of like fixing the problem, right? We want to get some action going. But what have you seen when you have maybe a new leadership or even I'm working with another plant that has a current leadership group, and they had some big moments this year around just having some deeper conversations, stopping around like their trust level, how they're impacting each other, how, when I ask you what happened yesterday and it didn't go well, am I thinking, is this going to be my fault? Or am I thinking, how do we solve this problem? What are your experiences in that area of how do you get those top teams really solution focused and not in the protection focused?
Well, it's interesting. I've been working with a manufacturing firm for a couple of years. And when they first started, there was very much a culture of blame. Now, I think the CEO in his defense didn't see it that way. He saw it as accountability. But how certainly the other members of that executive level team, but also then the plant managers, I mean, all the way down, they felt it more like criticism and blame, and it eroded the trust. And so there is a difference on how you show up on a team and the impact that it has, and sometimes we have blind spots as leaders. We don't really understand the impact of how we're showing up. And if there's and this is where I give this CEO a ton of credit, because he knew he wasn't creating the environment he wanted. He didn't know why. He didn't know how to change it, but he had the courage to say, let's address it and dig deeper. And I'm not sure. Let me pause there because I feel like I didn't really answer your question. That just sparked that story for me. So
no, let's lean into that. So, it's great when you know where you are and you know where you want to go. And sometimes it's hard when you're in the thick of it to know how to get there. And that's really sounds like how you're helping this CEO is like, hey, I know it can be better, but we want accountability, right? So that usually drives good emotions in a team because people are being held accountable. But there's this dance with accountability of like, am I open and transparent so we can figure out like where that root cause is? Or are we all trying to hold a few cards in our deck, so that the accountability doesn't come my way? And then what's going to happen if the accountability does come my way?
Oh gosh, there's so many directions we could go with this conversation. It's so rich. And yes, everything you just said, absolutely. And what I find is oftentimes what's missing when there's a lack of accountability is setting really clear expectations on the front end. What does this look like when it's done and done well? There are so many different ways that we can go with this, Trevor, and I'm just going to touch on one of them. When I'm working with managers and team leaders or plant managers, and they're frustrated because their employees, there isn't that accountability. More often than not, it's because there hasn't been clear expectations outlined on the front end. And so the manager says, oh, it's just easier if I do it myself. It's more efficient and it gets done better. So instead of taking that and putting the monkey on your back and then having so much to do, identify and lay out really clearly the expectations and what does this look like if this is done and done well? And then what are the benchmarks and milestones, and how often do we want to connect to be able to assess how you're doing on the accountability for whatever it is, the goal, the benchmark, the plan that you're trying to achieve.
Okay. So what if the expectations are laid out? Like they're not going to be like totally specific, but they're pretty clear. When you approach me, Darcy, sometimes I question, what your real intentions are. Because like, is it like, hey, I told you what the expectations are. Now I'm going to hold you accountable to this. So this may be a problem for you. How do you help leaders shift that feeling and how we show up, right? Showing up with more of an accusation, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to put my arm around you. I know you're doing your best and I know the expectations, but what's going on here?
Yeah. I mean, taking that human-centered approach, there's sometimes people think, oh, if I'm too soft, that your second option there, and too compassionate, then they're not going to understand what it is that have to be done. And yet going the other end of the extreme on that spectrum and saying, the expectations and you need to meet it, they're not feeling seen, heard, valued. So I think that, the goal here, if you're a manager and you're feeling some pushback, or there's some sense that you have that they're wondering what your intention is, that's the place to name it and to get curious and say, hey, so I've laid out the expectations and what this looks like if it's done and done well. First of all, I'm curious what questions you have and what support you need. How do we want to design accountability? And I'm noticing it seems like there's some hesitation. I'm curious if there's hesitation, or I know in the past it seems like we have agreement, and then we're like on different because then it doesn't get done. So I'm staying here for a minute and just get curious to see what questions do you have, what hesitations do you have, what support do you need?
Ooh, I like that. And that's one of my favorite sayings is to stay curious. Like if you're grounded and you can make the person feel like you're more curious. Like, are you truly curious, or do you just want to figure out like who's accountable for this? Because they're going to feel it either way, right? And that's going to decide whether you get to the real problem and whether you're really working collectively. So one of the comment I heard from a manager was on the executive team manufacturing group was, we have so many, we have the meetings, we have our daily, weekly, our strategy meetings. We got to be on the shop floor. There's just regular requirements. And it seems like when we are together, we have so many important topics to get through. We never really talk about like, how are we working together? Like, how are we feeling? And there's just no space for that. So do you find that with teams? And then how do you go from just go all the time to intentionally creating some space?
Oh, 100% we see that, Trevor. And it's so critical. So yes, of course you need to have KPIs and goals and strategies, all of that. Absolutely. But your secret superpower will be focusing on the team dynamics, because if you have increase trust, if you have a better understanding of people's different styles, if you have stronger communication, if you know how to have healthy conflict, you're going to be able to have those meetings where you're talking about the goals and the strategies and the challenges and the obstacles in so much more of an effective way. Because if you ignore the team dynamics, well, we see a number of things happen. One is you aren't discussing the elephant in the room, and people then leave the meeting and go have a post-meeting thing, right? And you, Trevor, call Joe and say, Joe, can you believe Darcy said that? That was so frustrating. And instead of creating that space to have those conversations about the team dynamics in the moment, you have these post-meeting meetings, and that is going to erode trust even faster. And so that's critical to be able to design your team alliance. How do we want to work together? How do we want to be when things get challenging? Because every team is going to have a storm. Of course, there's always storms. And I'd say, the one of the things that's really challenging is when a team, there's a spectrum. They don't feel safe to say what they're thinking in the moment. Or on the other end of the spectrum, the four toxins are showing up, where there's blaming, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And then wherever you are in that spectrum, if you aren't talking about the team dynamics, you're not going to be able to achieve those goals efficiently.
Ooh, say that again. So if you're not talking about the team dynamics,
yes,
then
you will not achieve those goals as efficiently. Yeah. So it's a little bit of go slow to go fast. When you think, well, we can't hit the pause button to talk about how we're interacting and how our trust is and how our communication is because we got goals to meet. The reality is, if you spend time doing that, you go slow, you're going to be more efficient. You're going to get better results.
That's another one of our sayings in manufacturing is that sometimes you do have to go slow to go fast.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's
100%.
It's really hard though, Darcy, for a leader, and I'm thinking of myself in that role of to really be taking out more time to have more conversations of how are we working together, and it seems counterproductive, but it's not.
It is hard, Trevor. I mean, anybody who's listening, you're sitting there driving to work thinking, yeah, this is great, Darcy, but you don't know. You haven't seen our production line and our supply chain and our, that's not even realistic. You don't know our manufacturing plant. And the reality is, you're right, I don't. And I know, but I know human team dynamics. And I know if you take the energy and time to put into the team dynamics, it will pay off and you'll get better results. I've seen it time and time again.
Okay, so I'll tell a quick story and then you come back with one that resonates for you. So there's a group of maintenance leaders, and one of the things that maintenance leaders don't often do is celebrate, right? And just talk about, so what has gone well since we last met. So they started doing that. They're sharing, just a few wins. And then just sharing a little bit, like, how are we having conversations with our teammates, right? What are those, and then just kind of sharing a little bit. Yeah, I talked to this person, it was difficult. And then, other people can kind of chime in and really talk a little bit deeper about, like you said, like, how are we functioning together? And at the end of the year, one of the leaders said, it's different now. And we couldn't have hit the goals we did if we wouldn't have had these upfront conversations, because really it's it, right? Instead of, our brain only has so much energy. So, and depending on how we show up is going to determine how we spend it. So if we can spend it thinking, why are they asking this question? And where is this going to lead? Is my guy going to get blamed? Is this going to get sent in an email so it's documented? If our brain spends any energy there, that's every ounce of energy we need to figure out the problem so the line can get running again. So they really saw an improvement in their reduction of downtime just in how their leadership was working. So that's, I was just wondering, like, is it similar stories in other industries, and what are you finding in your stories?
It is absolutely similar stories. That's a beautiful story. And the intentionality there to say, hey, let's hit the pause button and talk about how we're communicating, how we're having conflict, how we're designing accountability. How are we focusing on continuous improvement and learning and growth as a team? Because the reality is most organizations that we work with, they focus on making good hires. And that's really important. And then
Hmm.
training that person in their role and onboarding them for success in their position. But just like a football team, you aren't going to just have the best quarterback, the best linebacker, and just focus on their individual skills and development. You also have to train as a team. And that's the piece that's often missed, is saying, let's not only have the right hire and train them, how do we train as a team so that we can understand? I mean, I'll give you a perfect example, Trevor. The strongest teams have diverse personalities. You've got the visionary and the person who's really creative and innovative, and you have the analyst, the person who's like, give me every detail in
Yeah.
a
Oh,
spreadsheet.
yeah.
You've got the nurturer who's like, let's make sure that all voices are heard and focus on the process. And you have the closer who's like, I don't care about the process and voices. Can we reach our goals?
We
All
got a lot of
those
closers in manufacturing.
yeah,
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah.
And if you had all closers or if you had all visionaries, you are not going to get the same and strong results as if you have those differences. But the challenge is those differences are exactly what creates tension and conflict.
Mm.
And so if you don't talk about the differences and explore the team dynamics in order to utilize everyone's unique strengths, you get stuck and mired in dysfunction and frustration and conflict. So that's like the paradox. You need the different personalities to thrive as a team, and the different personalities are what create tension on the team.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of one of the managers on this team. And, it's having harder time with the newer leadership because it's just more broader direction. But this leader is more of a detail, right? Like this wants a little more detail, a little more communication. But if we can just talk a little bit more of how we show up, how we impact each other, it doesn't mean we have to give more detail and do all this, but we do have to surface it. We do have to name it to tame it. So yeah, read your book, Thoughtfully Fit, and I've followed some of your work, and you and I have talked. And so, like when we talk about this type of a problem, I mean, I'm in decent shape. You're in amazing shape. I love reading about your stories and just the commitment and your discipline, and then just how you kind of turn that into, your thoughtfully fit mindset, right, in your framework. So, like as we talk about these types of problems, just kind of like connect your framework and how that's
Mm,
been so repeatable for you with
yeah.
helping amazing
Well,
people.
when I first noticed it was, I'm a triathlete. And when I go and do a triathlon and I haven't trained, it's miserable. I'm slow and I get sore. And so it's no surprise when I train, I'm perform better. I don't get as sore and it's more fun. The same is true if you want to be thoughtfully fit. You need to train. How are you showing up in your relationships in a thoughtful and intentional way? And when you do that, you get better results in life, just like you get better results in sports, being physically fit. So that's where that model came from, that metaphor. And at the core, just like if you want to be physically fit, whether you want to have a better golf game or basketball game or just be able to take the elevator if the stairs are up, take the stairs if the elevator's out, you need a strong core. And you can do core work and ab works to develop that. The core in thoughtfully fit is 3 simple steps. You pause, think, and then act in that order. So,
Mhm.
we find some leaders, they're really good at acting, but then that, your strength taken to the extreme becomes a weakness. They overreact and they react impulsively, and then they've got a mess to clean up. So this is why we say that core, if you can engage your core and pause in the moment, kick yourself off of autopilot, think, how do I want to respond in this moment for the best outcome, and then act, you're going to get better results. So that's a little bit of an overview of the thoughtfully fit model.
Yeah, like the ready, shoot, aim. We got to get the right order.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So where would you, if there's a listener now driving into work and knows that we need to show up a little bit different, what can that person do right now? What's kind of one of the first steps in your model that you would advise on, or just share a story on where the beginnings have been helpful?
Yeah. So in the book, I go through, there's 6 obstacles that get in the way of being a high-performing leader and strategies for each of those. I'm gonna stay for a minute on the core, just knowing that we have limited time today. So I think one of the first things to do is, with awareness comes greater, actions. And so I think somebody's listening right now to reflect on, okay, when I'm at work, what's my default? Some people, their default is to pause. They're really good at hitting the pause button to be present in the moment. Some people are good at thinking and they're going to analyze the situation from multiple perspectives. And some people are good at acting. They're going to like immediately take control to get something done. So, first of all, look at what is your default and then assess, okay, our strengths taken to the extreme become a weakness. So if you pause, reflect on, do you pause too long and it becomes, avoidance, and you never go have that tough conversation that you've been ruminating on? If you're good at thinking and looking at the situation from multiple angles, do you suffer from analysis paralysis and right? And like overthinking? If you're
Yeah.
good at acting, do you react impulsively? So if you can raise awareness on what your default is, that's crucial. And then when you're in a situation and you're on the shop floor and a group come together and say, hey, we've got a problem. And you immediately want to jump in. You're like, ooh, okay, I'm going to pause, take a breath. I'm going to think, how do I want to show up right now? Because when I act
Yeah.
impulsively, it doesn't end well. I'm going to ask some questions, right? So that you can actually, just like if you want to build a strong, physically fit core, you can't do one sit up once a month and expect to have steel. So practice the core in the small areas. When you get an email from your spouse that is like, oh, really? You forgot to get the milk. I wanted to have cereal, whatever, pause and think, how do you want to show up and then act?
Yeah. And it's how do you want to show up? I think that's a great first step because I don't think everybody knows how they are showing up. And I think that's where the first step is like, how do I think I'm showing up?
Yeah.
And maybe you can just go like, how'd that conversation go? And if it didn't go well, then that may be an area of self-awareness, right? Where maybe you kind of need to think, okay, how come that conversation didn't go well? What did I own in that instead of that other person is just wants too much detail or is too rammy or you figure out those external reasons. But then if we really kind of sit in our heels, it can be like, okay, so how did I want to show up? How did I want to make that person feel at the end of the conversation? How'd that go?
Yeah. Beautiful. Absolutely. And to simplify it in the model, once you've acted, then it's like wash, rinse, repeat. You pause again and think, just like you're saying, Trevor, how did that go? Did it get the outcome I want? And if not, you can act again, you can adjust, and you can keep doing that over and over again in an intentional way.
Yeah. And then just ask like, so, hey, that conversation, like, how did it actually go for us?
Yes.
Like, how did that land with you?
And that
And
takes courage and vulnerability.
yeah, and maybe that's just too hard to get there. I think it's almost like we need that other bridge of how do we kind of like, if a team's not normally doing that right now, but we want to kind of spend more time on there. So if our objective is to take bigger risks next year and collaborate more, then what's the conversation we need to have to understand how we are showing up? And that's where I'm a fan of 360s as well, right? Just get some data
Yes.
on like how is it landing with everyone?
Yes. Yeah, and 360s are a great way to get feedback. If anybody's curious on the 6 obstacles that get in the way of being high performing, we have a quiz. So you go to thoughtfullyfit.com, free quiz. You can take it. It's a couple minutes, and it'll spit out what we haven't yet gotten into is all of the depth of the model, but it'll tell you, here's based on what you're responding, here's your biggest obstacle. Here's the biggest challenge, whether it might be flexibility and stretching to accept others as they are. It might be agility and not responding effectively when you're blindsided. It might be a lack of stillness, right? And then not
Mhm.
quieting the mind. And then it'll give you some concrete strategies on how you can move forward. Because like you said, awareness is key. And if you don't really know how you're showing up, that quiz might help give some new insights.
Well, we'll have the links in the show notes and we'll have it in the article on the Manufacturing Greatness website. And yeah, it's just great to collaborate with other people like you, Darcy, that's helping others have those conversations. You're an amazing coach. And I can tell that just in conversations with you and just, helping others because I was the guy that just said, leave your emotions at the door, right? I wasn't, what does it matter how I'm showing up? You just need to do your job and get it done, man. So where it's kind of like, man, I was just missing the skill. I wasn't listening to a podcast to help me, give me different ideas on how to approach it. So as the listeners kind of go on to their day, what do you want them to be left with when they think about you, Darcy, and being thoughtfully fit? What's the message that you want them to go back to the plant and share with their teams?
Well, a couple things. One is the more you do this, the easier it gets. So just like if you're, doing sit-ups the next year, like, oh my God, I'm so sore. But you do sit-ups every day for a month, it's like, oh, 20, I don't even feel that anymore. It's the same thing. If you want to be thoughtfully fit, the more you can pause, think, and act in any conversation, the easier it's going to get. And the more you can be vulnerable where it feels like you said, I went in, like, why do I have to talk emotions or ask how you're feeling or say, good job. You did your job. The more you do it, the easier it gets, the better results.
Yes.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I use that analogy as well, right? It's the gym. Like I went down to the gym this morning. It was a little bit harder this morning because I haven't been doing it every day. I was in a streak where I was like 7 days a week and people were like, oh, you need to take a day off. I'm like, no, I don't, because I just do that daily and it just becomes part of my habit. I'm not going for 2 hours a day. I'm just doing something. So now I've been doing like 3-4 days a week. I don't like it because I like doing it every day. And it's the same thing. Like if you show up every day with that curiosity, you're asking a few questions, you're checking in on how you're showing up. And I appreciate that analogy of, yeah, you can't do the offsite once a year and then think you're going to have all these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the other thing that I'll share is just people matter and humans we're flawed and we screw up and sometimes we screw up because we don't know better. And sometimes we screw up because we're angry and all sorts of reasons. And so, the other thing I'll leave your listeners with is just leaning into compassion, leaning into connection and forgiveness. As you said, Trevor, curiosity, like, hey, I noticed that we've had a rough go recently and I really appreciate you and feel like there's some tension here and I want to check in and see how you're feeling. It really, you go into work every single day, the more you can come to your workplace with compassion and really seeing that everybody's doing the best they can. And if they're not doing the best for what you think they should be doing, they're doing the best they can.
Oh, that's the way I want to leave it right there. Stay curious, have that compassion. And whether it's in your personal life or in your work, most people are doing their best. It just may not be what they should be doing and they just don't know. So let's have that deeper conversations to get results, not tell people what to do. If you want to learn more about Darcy, you got a heck of a personal story we didn't get to dive into either today, but I'll leave the link to your book and your website on our articles and our podcast links. And thanks so much for coming on the show. You're awesome, Darcy.
And it's such a pleasure. I love what you're doing and putting out and the compassion that you have and the passion you have for the work you're doing into helping those be more effective teams, leaders, in manufacturing. It's really incredible. Thank you so much.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.